My name is Dana Holloway. I am 33 years old. And on a Saturday evening in October, I sat at a table of 14 people in a private dining room at Carver Steakhouse on Peachtree Road in Atlanta, watched my family order $3,822 worth of food and wine, and listened to my father lift his glass, let the laughter settle around him like a coat he had worn all his life, look directly at me across the table, and say, "Dana's got it. She's been gone 3 years. It's the least she can do." He smiled when he said it, the warm, easy smile of a man who has never once considered that the room might not agree with him. 14 people laughed without hesitation. My mother reached for the bottle and refilled her glass without looking up. My sister Renee pressed her knife through her fillet as if the conversation had already moved on. I set my menu down. I looked at my father. I held his gaze. I said nothing. I picked up my glass. I smiled back. And I waited, because I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 3 years. But before I go any further, welcome to Velvet Revenge Stories. This is where ordinary women meet impossible families and find their footing through patience, principle, and one well-timed truth. If someone has ever pulled your chair out at their table and handed you their bill, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Hit the subscribe button. And let's get into this together. I need to back up. That Saturday evening wasn't the beginning. All the way back to a Sunday dinner in Decatur, Georgia, and a kitchen table where the news of my future landed like something nobody had been asked to receive. I grew up in Decatur. I was the third of 4 children. My father, Gerald, has worked in commercial insurance for 31 years. He has a laugh that fills a room before the joke does. He is the kind of man who takes up space so naturally that the people around him have simply learned to arrange themselves around that space and call it family. My mother, Phyllis, taught Sunday school at Greater Bethel Baptist for 22 years. She is warm in the way that requires an audience. One-on-one. She runs at a different temperature. I have an older brother, Marcus, and a sister, Renee. And then there is me, Dana, the one who handled things. The job offer came in February. I told them at Sunday dinner. I waited until the plates were cleared. I set my hands flat on the table, the way I do when I need something to hold. I said, "I've accepted a position in Seattle as a senior operations manager. I leave in 3 weeks." My father put his glass down, not hard, just down. He looked at me the way he looked at things he had decided not to understand. His jaw shifted once to the side. "Seattle," he said. Just the one word. He let it sit in the center of the table, like an object nobody wanted to touch. My mother clasped her hands in her lap, beneath the table. I could tell, because her shoulders rose slightly, the way they do when she is holding herself together in public. She turned her chin toward me and said, very carefully, "Who is going to be here to help with things, Dana?" I held her gaze. I said, "The same person who was here before I was old enough to drive." Her chin moved, just once. The small, precise movement of a woman absorbing something she has decided not to respond to directly. Marcus had his phone face down on the table. He did not pick it up. He did not say anything either. Renee looked at her dessert. I said, "I leave in 3 weeks." Nobody said congratulations. The table held the silence, the way tables do when a family has decided to let the clock run out on a conversation rather than finish it. I drove home alone. I packed my apartment over the following weekend. On a Tuesday morning in March, I loaded the CRV and drove out of Atlanta at 6:15 in the morning. I passed my parents' house on Fern Drive. The light over the porch was on. I did not slow down. Seattle changed me, but not in some dramatic, cinematic way. I didn't break down, and I didn't magically become a completely different person. Just the quiet, steady effect of being somewhere where nobody's story about you arrived before you did. I showed up. I worked. I built something meaningful. My manager, Sandra Briggs, had kept an eye on me for exactly 90 days when she called me into her office. She closed the door. She sat across from me and looked at her notes for a long moment before she looked up. She laced her fingers together on the desk. She said, "Dana," then leaned forward slightly. "Where have you been?" I held very still. I said, "Atlanta." She held my eyes for a moment longer than the question required. The corner of her mouth pulled into a slight, unreadable shape. Not a smile, but something far more rewarding. She said, "That's too far. We're keeping you." In 3 years, I redesigned 2 workflow systems, reduced processing time by 31%, was promoted twice, and led a contract renewal worth $47 million over 5 years. And when the official press release went out, my name was right there on it. Sandra sent a bottle of champagne to my office that afternoon. The card inside was signed with a single letter, S. It read, "I knew it. My family and I spoke approximately once a month. My mother called on Sundays." She would settle into her chair. I could always tell by the way the call went slightly quieter, and talk about church, about Renee, about something my father had said that needed somewhere to go. She asked about the weather in Seattle once. In 3 years. But she never once asked about my work. I noted it each time the conversation ended and the line went quiet, and I sat with my phone in my hand for a moment before I set it down and went back to what I was doing. I always went back to what I was doing. I came back to Atlanta in October because my father needed me. Routine cardiac ablation, arrhythmia he had managed for 4 years. It was a low-risk procedure. But my mother called on a Thursday, and when I picked up, her voice carried that particular flatness of someone who has been rehearsing what they need to say and has decided directness is the only way through. She did not say hello the way she usually did. She simply said, "We need you here, Dana," 4 words. Not "how are you," not "we miss you," just "we need you here." I booked a flight for the following Friday. The procedure went smoothly. By Sunday afternoon, my father was in his recliner watching football, his color back, his laugh arriving ahead of itself the way it always had. By Sunday evening, my mother had already planned the welcome home dinner. It was scheduled for Monday, and it was all for me. She texted the family group chat with the particular energy of a woman who has found a reason to gather. "Welcome home dinner for Dana, Carver Steakhouse, Monday at 7. Private dining room." 14 people confirmed within the hour. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My father had a cardiac procedure, and he was fine, and within 24 hours, the family had organized a restaurant evening, not to celebrate his recovery, but to celebrate my arrival. I read the text, set my phone face down on the hotel bed, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then picked it up again and confirmed. I arrived at Carver's at 6:50. The hostess walked me through to the private dining room. I stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in. There were 14 people, menus already open, and wine already poured for the people who had been there long enough to settle in. Marcus and his wife, Denise, were at the far end. Renee and her boyfriend, Tyler, were mid-table. My aunt, Carol, was already deep into the appetizer section of the menu, with the focused attention of someone who had been thinking about this since the invitation arrived. My parents sat at the head. My mother saw me first. She raised one hand in a small wave, the way she greets people in public, warm, efficient, and already moving to the next thing. I found my seat between my aunt, Carol, and an empty chair with no place card. I sat down, opened the menu, and began watching what people ordered. As an operations analyst, the first thing I do in any environment is gather information. Here is what 14 people ordered. Marcus, a $48 dry-aged ribeye. Denise, a $36 sea bass. Renee, a $32 filet. Tyler, a $44 lamb rack. My aunt, Carol, ordered the $40 seafood platter as a starter, followed by the $38 surf and turf for her main. My uncle, Wayne, reached for the wine list, ran his finger down to the middle section, tapped once, and looked up at the waiter. He said, "We'll have this one, $140. My mother pressed her hand lightly to her chest and said, "Oh, Wayne, you didn't have to." He waved his hand in the comfortable way of a man spending money that isn't his. He said, "It's a celebration." However, he did not say what was being celebrated, and he did not say who was paying. My mother smiled, picked up her glass, and did not look at me. I ran the total in my head while the waiter completed the circuit. $3,822 before tip. I held it. I said nothing. I ordered the $28 roasted chicken and a glass of water. I sat with that number for the length of the appetizer course. 31 minutes. While the table moved through its rhythms around me, there was laughter, the refilling of glasses. My father telling the story about his procedure to my Uncle Wayne for the second time that evening. The same beats, the same pause before the punchline, Wayne laughing in the same place as if it were new. My mother leaning toward Tyler to tell the story about the time I got lost at Six Flags when I was 7 years old. She has been telling this story at family dinners for 26 years. I am 33 years old. I manage a team of 22 people and a budget of $11 million. At my mother's table, I am still the 7-year-old who got lost at Six Flags. I set down my fork. I let the conversation move around me like water around a stone. And then I caught the waiter's eye. He was 20-something, composed the way good waiters at places like Carver's are composed. The practiced neutrality of someone who has heard and seen everything twice and reacted to none of it. He stepped toward me. I leaned forward slightly. I said 2 sentences. He held eye contact for a moment. He gave one clean nod. He turned and walked away. The table hadn't noticed. My father was still talking. My mother was still smiling. Renee was looking at her phone under the edge of the table. Nobody had seen. Nobody knew. Sitting back, I slowly picked up my water and waited. The check came 40 minutes later. The waiter appeared at my father's elbow. He set 14 separate folders on the table in one smooth, practiced movement that covered the surface like cards being dealt. One was in front of each person. My father looked at the folder in front of him, then he looked at the one in front of me, then he looked up. His face moved through several things at once. Confusion first, then the beginning of something harder, then the particular calculation of a man in a room full of witnesses who understands that the next sentence he speaks will be heard by every single person at the table. He let out a short breath through his nose. He said, "Dana, what is this?" Not a question, but a statement that wanted to be a question. I met his eyes calmly across the table. I said, "The check is split, Dad. One per person. Everyone covers their own." He pushed his tongue against the inside of his cheek, a thing he does when he is choosing between 2 versions of what he wants to say. His hand was flat on the tablecloth. He said, "That's not how this works." I said, "I flew from Seattle. I took a full week of paid leave. I came because Mom called and said you needed me here. I am glad to be here, but I am a guest at this dinner, Dad, not the host. I did not plan it. I did not choose the restaurant. I did not invite 14 people. I arrived the way I always arrive." I said it evenly, without heat, without rushing any syllable. The way you say something you have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to set down in the right place. My Uncle Wayne put 2 fingers on the edge of his folder and looked at my father with an expression that said more than he was going to say out loud. My father looked at the table, at his lobster, at his folder, at the wine glass my uncle had paid for in everyone's name without asking anyone. Then he reached for his wallet. My Aunt Carol opened her folder quietly and pulled out her card without making eye contact with anyone. She caught mine as she did it. She held it for just a moment, the look of a woman who has been watching a particular thing build toward a particular moment for a very long time and has just watched it arrive. She said nothing. She gave me one slow nod, small, deliberate, the kind that carries everything it isn't saying. That was enough. The dinner ended 37 minutes later, with less conversation than it had started with. My mother made 3 attempts to shift the energy. She mentioned her grandchildren, she mentioned the church retreat, and she mentioned the weather was going to be nice this week. The weather was not doing much heavy lifting. We paid, and we left. In the parking lot, my father's hand came down on my arm from behind. His grip was light, not restraining. The grip of a man who needs a moment to gather what he wants to say. I turned. He was standing with one hand in his coat pocket, the other at his side now, looking at a point just past my left shoulder. He said, "That was embarrassing." I held my ground. I said, "For who, Dad?" He shifted his weight, his jaw tightened, and then released. He said, "You know what I mean." I said, "I manage $47 million in annual supply chain contracts. I have a team of 22 people." In 3 years, nobody in this family asked once what I do for work, not once. But every time something needed handling, the billing dispute, the contractor recommendation you called me about last April, the insurance question Marcus texted me in June, I handled it from Seattle, without being asked, because I love this family. I paused. I let that word sit between us. Love. I said, but love is not a payment method. He looked at me for a long time. The parking lot light caught the gray at his temples. He had more gray than I remembered. 3 years is a long time. He looked down. He said quietly, your mother makes that chicken you like on Wednesdays. I felt something move in my chest. Something old and complicated. I said, I'll be there at 6. He nodded once. He walked to the car. I stood in the parking lot and let the October air sit on my face for a moment. It was cool, clean, honest the way cold air is honest. Then I got in my car and I drove to the hotel and I sat on the bed in the dark for a while before I turned on the light. Wednesday came the way good things sometimes come. Quietly, without announcement, smelling like herb butter, and the kind of afternoon light that only exists in the kitchen of the house where you grew up. My mother had the radio on low, the same station she has had on low in that kitchen my entire life. She was at the stove when I came through the door. She didn't turn around immediately. She said, the chicken still has 20 minutes. There's sweet tea in the pitcher. I hung my coat on the hook by the back door. I poured 2 glasses. I set one on the counter beside her. She glanced at it, then she glanced at me. A quick thing, the look of a woman taking a measurement she doesn't want to be caught taking. She turned back to the stove. We didn't speak for a while. The radio talked for us. My father came in from the garage at 5 minutes to 6, wiping his hands on a cloth he tucked into his back pocket as he came through the door. He stopped when he saw me. Something moved across his face, there and gone quickly. The way feelings move across the faces of people who have spent decades deciding not to show them. Pulling out his chair, he sat down, looked at me, and said, Dana, just my name. I replied, Hey, Dad. He picked up his fork. Halfway through dinner, my father set his fork down parallel to his plate, the way he does when he's about to say something he has been thinking about for longer than the meal. He looked at the table for a moment. Then, he looked at me. He said, That logistics company. I said, Clear path, my voice steady. He nodded slowly. He said, How long have you been the director? I said, 14 months. He was quiet. His thumb moved along the edge of his knife handle once, twice. Then he said, And before that? I said, Senior manager, 18 months. He looked at his plate. He said, So you went from analyst to director in 3 years. I said, Yes, Dad. The words sat between us. Clean and simple, the way true things do, when there is finally enough space for them to breathe. He picked up his fork. He said, That's something. In my father's vocabulary, that's something is the highest praise he has ever given anything. I have been listening to my father for 33 years. I know what he means. I said, Thank you, Dad, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother reached over and refilled my tea without being asked. She did not look at me when she did it. She just filled the glass. Then, she set the pitcher down. And she said softly, still looking at the table, You were always the one who figured things out. She said it the way you say something you have been folding and refolding in your pocket for years, and have finally decided to unfold and leave on the table. I said, I know, Mom. I let it sit. The kitchen held it, the herb butter and the radio, and the October light through the window over the sink. All 3 of us at the table held it together, quietly, like people who are learning a new language in a room they have always lived in. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know what some of you are feeling. You are wondering if it was worth it. The split check, the parking lot, the text Marcus sent the next morning. He held his phone toward me in his hand at the breakfast table, so I could read it without saying a word. That was cold. I looked at the screen, I looked at him, I said it was arithmetic. He put his phone face down on the counter. He left the kitchen. Here is what I know about worth. I've spent 33 years being worth the handling, worth the airport run, worth the billing dispute, worth the contractor call at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday when no one else had the number. I have been the currency this family used to solve its problems. Not because they are evil people, but because it was available, because I was available, because nobody had ever shown them the edge of that availability. If you have ever been the person in your family who shows up, the one they call because you will answer, the one who solves the thing because you always solve the thing, drop a comment below. Tell me what that has cost you. Tell me what it felt like the day you stopped paying. Subscribe, because this story ends exactly the way I needed it to. Quietly, completely, at a table where the bill finally landed in front of the people who had ordered from it. I flew back to Seattle on a Friday morning. The plane lifted off the runway at 7:42. Atlanta spread out below me in the early light. The highways, the trees, the particular shape of a city you grew up inside and can only see clearly from above. I looked at it until the clouds came between us. Then I opened my laptop. Because the work does not stop. It never stops. You simply hold all of it at the same time. Sandra Briggs was already in when I arrived at the office. She always was. She looked up from her desk when I came through the door. She studied my face for a moment, the way she studies things, quickly, thoroughly, without appearing to do either. She said, "How is Atlanta?" I set my bag down. I said, "My father had a cardiac procedure. He's doing great." She held my eyes. She said, "And the family?" I thought about the parking lot, the herb butter kitchen, the glass refilled without being asked. I said, "They're fine." In the way families are fine when someone has finally said the thing that needed saying. She held that for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, recognition, maybe, or the particular knowing of a woman who has had her own tables and her own checks and her own parking lot conversations. She nodded once. She said, "Good. You needed to go." She went back to her documents. I walked to my desk. I looked at the harbor through the office window, the way I look at it every morning, gray and flat, and moving slowly in the direction it had chosen long before anyone was watching. My grandmother Josephine used to say something when I was small. She said it only to me, in the particular way of a woman who knows which child in a room most needs to hear a thing. She used to cup my face in both hands and look at me directly and say, "Baby, the people who take for granted the ones who handle things always discover the truth the same way, at the table, when the handling stops." She was right. She was always right. My name is Dana Holloway. I am 33 years old. I am the Director of Supply Chain Operations at ClearPath Logistics in Seattle. I handle things. I always have. The difference now is that I choose what I handle and what I let the table hold for itself. That is my story. One dinner, one check, 14 people who discovered that the person who always paid, in every sense of the word, had simply decided to stop. If this reminded you that love is not a payment method, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me what moment hit you hardest. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.